The story begins with complete chaos at a graduation party, where the first prince of the kingdom of Rubini, Renato, suddenly announces that he is breaking off his engagement, effective immediately. The most shocking part is that he does this in front of everyone without hesitation, and he does not even realize that he is speaking to the wrong person. That alone makes it clear that the situation is going to become a messy and dramatic affair. To understand how everything led to that moment, the story goes back to an earlier time. On a bright and peaceful day in the royal capital of Rubini, the sun is shining and everything feels calm as a carriage from House Anivadze arrives. Inside is the heroine, Maria Anivadze, also known as Mimi. She is excited and full of energy because she is about to reunite with her childhood friend, Ada Amethyst. It has been 2 years since they last met, so she wants to make a good impression. At first, Mimi almost rushes in with her usual lively personality, but her attendant quickly reminds her to behave properly. She pauses, composes herself, and greets Duke Amethyst with a graceful curtsy. The Duke simply laughs warmly and tells her there is no need to act so formal. He says that her natural personality is something he appreciates, and he mentions that her presence has always helped Ada. He hopes that she will continue to support her. Then the tone of the conversation changes slightly. The Duke explains that Ada's situation is no longer the same as before. She is now preparing to marry into the royal family and is set to become the future wife of Prince Renato. Hearing this, Mimi immediately declares that she will do everything she can to protect Ada. It is a bold promise, but it reflects her straightforward and loyal nature. Later, while having tea together, Mimi eagerly asks Ida about her engagement, wondering how it happened and whether there was any romance involved. Ida calmly explains that it was not her own choice. The decision was made by her father for political reasons, and although she feels honored, she admits that she never had the option to refuse. A subtle heaviness fills the air, so Ada changes the topic and asks Mimi about her own situation. Mimi then enthusiastically explains everything, describing it as an all-in-one situation that she had already written about in her letter. The story then shifts to a flashback. One day, while training with the family knights as usual, Mimi receives unexpected news that her baby brother has been born. She is overjoyed and rushes to see him, gently holding him and feeling his warmth. However, the situation quickly changes. Her father tells her directly that now that a male heir has been born, she is no longer needed as the successor. Instead, she should go out into the world and find a husband. For most people, this would be devastating, especially since Mimi had spent her entire life training to inherit her family's role. However, she reacts differently. She accepts it calmly and even smiles, saying she is happy that her younger brother Teo can take over. Becoming the head of the house was never truly her dream, and she believes the skills she learned will still be useful. She even shows Ada something unusual, a hair clip that secretly contains a family photo, while also functioning like brass knuckles. It is both sentimental and ridiculous, perfectly reflecting her personality. Now she has a new goal. She does not want to remain as the extra sister of the heir, so she decides to find the perfect husband. She admits that she tried back home, but most suitable candidates were already taken, or perhaps she was simply not very popular, though she says this without realizing how it sounds. That is why she came to Rubini, to begin her search for a husband. Soon after, Ida brings Mimi to the Royal Academy, which was once exclusive to royal sons but is now open to nobles as well, allowing them to build connections early. As they walk through the academy, Mimi notices that many students bow respectfully to Ida because of her engagement, while others give her cold and judgmental looks. They then meet Placido, the second prince. Before Ada can introduce them properly, Mimi casually greets him and tells him to call her Mimi. When she realizes who he is, she panics and quickly switches to formal speech. Placido finds this amusing. He already knows about her because Ada often talks about her. He even recalls a time when Ada was ill and Mimi visited her, though Ada had been unsure whether Mimi was a boy or a girl because of her behavior. This leads to several humorous and slightly embarrassing stories, including one where Ada threw chestnuts at Placido after being teased. As they grow more comfortable, Placido offers to help Mimi find a husband, and she happily accepts. However, when Placido tries to call over his older brother Renato, he is ignored. Renato continues walking, focused on something else. Ida quietly explains that he will not come over, and Placido describes him as talented but stubborn, a perfectionist, and a workaholic. Placido eventually leaves to check on him. Meanwhile, Mimi and Ada continue their tour. During this, Mimi accidentally bumps into another noble girl, Eleonora. Despite the impact, Eleonora remains composed and politely forgives her, though she clearly thinks Mimi is careless. She walks away while slightly limping, suggesting that Mimi's strength may have hurt her. That night, Mimi reflects on everything and begins to feel that something is not quite right. Ida seems closer to Placido than to her own fiancé, which makes Mimi wonder whether Ida is truly happy. Even so, Mimi focuses on her own goal of finding a husband. Days pass, and she writes letters home, describing her life and the friends she has made, even though they often tease her for her rough behavior. She remains optimistic. Eventually, a school party takes place. Mimi is alone at first, but Placido finds her. Ada is absent because she is sick with a fever, and Placido appears genuinely worried, making Mimi suspect that he may have feelings for her. Placido then asks Mimi to dance. She panics at first because she is not used to formal dancing, but he reassures her not to overthink anything, saying that the most important thing was simply to have fun. Hearing that, she relaxed and agreed. Soon after, the two of them hit the dance floor. At first, she was completely caught off guard by his charm, but little by little, she found her rhythm. Before long, she was dancing with energy and confidence, fully enjoying herself. But of course, after all that movement, she ended up starving and immediately went to grab something to eat. Placido couldn't help but think how lucky Ada was to have a best friend like Mimi. That's when he brought up something Mimi had never known before, that Ada had originally stayed with her because she was overwhelmed by the pressure of noble education. And now, he suspected she might be going through that same stress again. Mimi was surprised. To her, Ada had always seemed perfect, dependable, elegant, and composed. Realizing there was more beneath the surface, Mimi once again promised herself that she would protect her friend no matter what. Then, he casually suggested that maybe if both of them debuted at the upcoming graduation party, it might help Ada feel better. Later on, Mimi learned from Ada that the students 1 year above them would soon be graduating, which meant the party would be a major event. Naturally, all eyes would be on Prince Renato. At the same time, Mimi excitedly told Ada all about the party she had just attended, especially how much meat she got to eat. She almost asked Ada about her feelings toward Prince Placido, but stopped herself at the last second. Instead, she shifted the topic to the graduation party and even joked about finding herself a marriage partner. Not long after, Mimi wrote another letter to her parents, explaining that she would now be receiving proper lady training from Ada. She also mentioned that she was waiting for Prince Placido to introduce her to someone suitable. Soon, Ada entered the room and helped Mimi get ready. She complimented Mimi's hair, saying it sparkled beautifully, like golden wheat during an autumn harvest. Mimi tried to return the compliment, but struggled to find the right words, awkwardly calling Ada's hair a beautiful golden gold. Ada laughed it off and said that once they returned, she would definitely teach Mimi how to speak more elegantly. Then, on the way to the party, Mimi asked why Ada wasn't riding with her fiancé. Ada simply explained that he was busy. Mimi, however, couldn't understand that at all. If she were in Ada's place, she'd force herself to meet him no matter what. But before Ada could respond properly, their carriage suddenly came to an abrupt stop. When they looked outside, they saw that Lady Eleonora's carriage was blocking the road. Concerned, they tried to check on her, but Eleonora coldly told them to leave her alone. She made it clear she had no intention of relying on Ada. Understanding her stance, Ida decided to move on with Mimi, though Mimi couldn't help but worry about Eleonora. Eventually, they arrived at the graduation party, and it was absolutely grand. Important figures from all over had gathered. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The two princes of Rubini entered, and immediately, the girls rushed toward them in excitement. They couldn't stop praising their looks, Renato's cold, aloof demeanor, and even the slight furrow in his brow, while Placido was adored for his softer, charming presence. However, right behind them was Eleonora. Mimi quickly noticed something strange. Renato was escorting Eleonora instead of his fiancé. Soon, other girls began crowding around Ada, asking her the same question. Seeing Eleonora clinging to him like that made it seem like a deliberate insult toward Ada. Sensing the tension, Mimi pushed through the crowd and suggested they step outside for drinks, clearly annoyed by everyone's insensitive questions. But Ada remained calm. She understood that people were naturally curious about Prince Renato, and by extension, about her. Still, she admitted that it was exhausting not knowing whether people's concern was genuine or not. Mimi reassured her, saying she always spoke honestly and never hid her feelings, so Ida didn't need to worry about her. That lightened the mood, and the two of them shared a laugh. But soon, Mimi noticed something again. Renato was escorting Eleonora. Others explained that since Eleonora's carriage had broken down, the prince allowed her to ride with him. Mimi began to feel like something wasn't right. Then suddenly, Renato turned around and their eyes met. He immediately started walking toward them. And as he approached, he casually said that since she had already seen him, it made things easier. Without hesitation, he grabbed Mimi's hand, mistaking her for Ada, and publicly declared that he was breaking off their engagement. Placido quickly stepped in, questioning what his brother was doing. But Renato continued, claiming that Ada had been jealous of Eleonora and had been secretly harassing and stalking her. According to him, there was even evidence gathered by his attendant. Eleonora nervously tried to correct him, pointing out that he had the wrong person, but he ignored her and kept going. He went on to say that he couldn't tolerate someone abusing their status to harm others. Then, he demanded that Ada be suspended from the academy and that she apologize to Eleonora immediately. The entire room fell into whispers as people reacted to the sudden drama. Meanwhile, Mimi stood there, unsure what to do, until she glanced back and saw Ada's sad expression. At that moment, she remembered her promise. So, without hesitation, she stepped forward, grabbed Renato's wrist, and told him he had everything wrong. Then, with confidence, she revealed her identity. She was Maria Anovazzi and pointed out that his actual fiancé was standing right behind her. And to top it all off, she told him that what he really needed right now was a pair of glasses. Later, after that absolute disaster of a party, things were still tense, but slowly starting to settle down. Mimi was clearly still upset about everything that happened, and honestly, she had every reason to be, since the whole situation had spiraled out of control. Renato's attendant, Raimondo, stepped in quickly to apologize on his behalf, trying to smooth things over. At the same time, Placido looked genuinely guilty, and along with the others, he turned toward Renato, ready to lecture him. Even so, Mimi didn't want to drag things out any further, so she firmly told him that as long as he understood he was wrong, that was enough for her, cutting off the tension before it could grow again. Meanwhile, Ada gently told Mimi not to be too harsh, explaining that Renato truly seemed to be reflecting on his actions, and even mentioning that this incident might delay his inauguration as crown prince, although Mimi didn't really care about that at all. Instead, what worried Mimi more was Ada's situation, especially her formal debut and engagement. And when that topic came up, Ida's expression turned slightly sad as she admitted that Renato had never really been interested in their engagement in the first place, and she had always expected that he might cancel it eventually. However, even hearing that didn't make Mimi any less frustrated, because in her eyes, ending things publicly like that was still unacceptable, especially since he had also falsely accused Ada of bullying Eleonora, which made no sense at all. Trying to make sense of it, Mimi questioned how Renato could even mistake her for his fiancé, but Ida calmly explained that they rarely saw each other, which only made Mimi more annoyed, because that basically meant he didn't even recognize his own fiancé's face. Despite all that, Ida continued to defend him, saying that he was usually wise and considerate, although Mimi honestly wasn't convinced, since he hadn't shown any of that so far. Still, Ida shifted her concern toward Mimi, pointing out that she had attracted a lot of attention during the incident and worrying that it might affect her chances of finding a husband. And that comment hit Mimi harder than expected, because it reminded her of her own situation, how she wasn't popular and had even moved abroad to find a suitable match. As her thoughts spiraled, she started criticizing herself harshly, calling herself a disgrace and the worst kind of noble lady, only to realize too late that she had said part of it out loud, quickly covering her mouth in embarrassment. Ida tried to reassure her, saying that Renato would likely fix things and that she would also help clear up the misunderstanding. And although Mimi appreciated that, she still blamed everything on that foolish prince, even thinking that next time they met, she might actually hit him. Compared to Renato, she felt Placido was much kinder, since he had approached her gently and kept apologizing even though it wasn't really his fault, which led Mimi to casually mention that he seemed close to Ada. That immediately made Ada flustered, as she denied it and explained that they had simply known each other since childhood. But Mimi, being completely straightforward, said they looked good together anyway, which only made things more awkward. Later, while heading off to bathe, Mimi kept thinking about it, wondering if Ada might actually like Placido, and if that were true, then maybe Renato ending the engagement wasn't such a bad thing, although that still left the question of Ada's reputation unresolved, and after overthinking everything far too much, Mimi's brain basically shut down and she ended up passing out. The next morning, Mimi was invited to the castle, which surprised her quite a bit. And while waiting in the drawing room, she couldn't help but admire how luxurious everything was. From the elegant surroundings to the fragrant, perfectly made desserts that clearly came from a top-tier pastry chef. As she took it all in, Rai served her tea and informed her that Renato would arrive soon after finishing his business, and when he finally entered, he greeted her with a polished smile and sincerely apologized for keeping her waiting. What surprised Mimi the most, though, was that he pronounced her family name, Anovazzi, correctly, something most people fail to do, which immediately left a small impression on her. He then continued to apologize for the incident at the party, explaining that Placido had told him about her situation and that he deeply regretted damaging her reputation. But Mimi, being as blunt as ever, ended up saying that if he really felt bad, he should help set her up with someone, which, Surprisingly, he didn't reject and instead said he would consider. After that, Renato explained why he hadn't recognized Ada, saying that he hadn't seen her in a long time and had left the responsibility of escorting her to Placido, so all he really remembered was her golden hair, which led him to mistake Mimi for her, since she had the same feature. Hearing that, Mimi couldn't help but feel a little flustered, but she quickly refocused and asked why he caused such a scene at such an important event, especially since it could have cost him his position as crown prince. At that point, Renato's expression turned serious as he admitted that he thought losing his position might actually solve all of his problems, which completely caught Mimi off guard and made her even more curious. Leaning in slightly, she told him to just whisper everything to her, promising she wouldn't tell anyone, and although he found her attitude amusing, he went along with it and revealed that Placido had feelings for Ida. That single piece of information changed everything for Mimi, because now the situation made much more sense, as Renato had likely been trying to step down so Placido could inherit the position and be with Ida, although Mimi almost revealed that Ida might feel the same way before stopping herself, well, trying to, since she accidentally said it out loud anyway. Renato simply told her to keep it a secret, explaining that Placido's feelings had always been obvious and that he had been thinking about Ida since they were children. But because Ada's father wanted her to marry the crown prince, Renato decided to remove himself from the situation, even though it meant causing trouble. Trying to lighten the mood, Mimi suddenly remembered that he wanted to make it up to her, so she immediately asked for food, which made him offer her marbled steak, causing her to light up instantly. Then, out of nowhere, she pointed out his dark circles and told him to fix his sleep schedule, and when he admitted that he had been struggling with insomnia due to stress, she casually said she could fall asleep instantly and decided to teach him her family's special counting method. As she demonstrated it with exaggerated martial arts movements while counting to 10, Renato was completely stunned at first, but soon burst into laughter, unable to stop as she continued making ridiculous expressions until he finally gave in, exhausted from laughing so much. Satisfied, Mimi told him that proper sleep and food were important, and before leaving, Renato gently touched her hair and said he would think of her face before sleeping, which left her blushing. After that, Mimi started seeing him in a better light, but at the same time, Eleonora had been watching everything, growing increasingly jealous and angry. Later on, when Mimi met Renato again at a restaurant, she happily enjoyed the meal he treated her to, while he admitted that he had been sleeping better ever since learning her counting method, saying that for the first time in years, he felt at peace. However, after the meal, Renato had to leave for urgent business and arranged a carriage for her, but without her realizing it, the carriage was different, and as it moved, its true identity was revealed, showing that she had actually been kidnapped. She was brought before Eleonora, who mocked her for being too foolish to notice, but Mimi immediately fired back, getting under her skin, which led Eleonora to reveal her frustration about failing to win Renato's attention and how her father's corruption had been exposed. Mimi quickly understood that Renato had known everything all along and had been acting with purpose, but before she could process it further, Eleonora demanded that she write a ransom letter, planning to use her as leverage before bringing her inside. Meanwhile, Renato realized Mimi hadn't returned and immediately began searching for her, feeling responsible for leaving her alone. Back at the hideout, Mimi quickly freed herself from the ropes. At first, she tried to slip away quietly, but she made just a bit too much noise, which gave her position away. Meanwhile, Renato and Rai were questioning a bystander who had seen the suspicious carriage earlier. As soon as they got a lead, Renato didn't hesitate. He jumped onto his horse and rushed off at full speed. At the same time, Eleonora believed everything was going according to plan. She thought Mimi was still captured, but suddenly, Mimi vanished and reappeared, managing to escape. Instead of running endlessly, Mimi made a bold move. She led her pursuers into an open field. There, she let them strike first, setting up the perfect chance to counterattack. Now, this is where things turned. The Anicapped family was famous for their martial arts, and Mimi proved exactly why. She knocked one attacker's blade away with a clean kick, completely disarming him. In fact, even as the youngest among her siblings, she had been chosen as the heir because she was the strongest. And with a final uppercut, she knocked out the last of them. But just as she caught her breath, Renato suddenly appeared. Caught off guard, Mimi panicked, not because of the fight, but because he had seen everything. Embarrassed, she instantly switched her demeanor, pretending to be weak, scared, and delicate, doing her best to act like a proper noble lady. However, Renato wasn't fooled. If anything, he was impressed. Soon after, she learned something even worse. He had been watching her the entire time, from the moment she escaped. To Mimi, that felt like the end of her carefully maintained image as a refined noblewoman. Meanwhile, Eleonora and her group were captured, bringing the whole incident to a close. On the ride back, Mimi found herself sitting on Renato's lap, completely confused about how things ended up like this. When she questioned him, he didn't really answer directly. Instead, he mentioned that the authorities would likely investigate Eleonora further, especially regarding her involvement in bribery. Then, without warning, Renato gently pulled Mimi closer, resting her against his shoulder. In a soft voice, he whispered that it must have been terrifying for her. That simple line hit her harder than anything else, because no one had ever said that to her before. For a moment, she almost broke down, her eyes filling with tears. Still, she quickly composed herself, thanked him, and asked him to let her go. But Renato simply replied, no, and strangely enough, she couldn't pull away. He then told her he wanted to call her Mimi from now on, more personally. He went on to explain something deeper, that thinking about her had helped him sleep peacefully. For someone like him, burdened by the responsibilities of being crown prince, dealing with politics, the economy, and endless pressure, it had been a long time since he felt any sense of calm. But somehow, she cleared his mind, like a fog lifting. To Mimi, it almost sounded like he had some divine revelation. And honestly, Renato seemed to think the same, like meeting her was some kind of guidance from above. And then, out of nowhere, he asked her to marry him. That marks the end of today's Anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach a current goal of 10K subscribers.